what I'm going to do this evening is pretty much carry on from where Brandon stopped off. Well, now he had a little bit of a background for you, but also he did a great session earlier this week, or last week, I think it was. He did an opportunity meeting, actually. And he did a bit of an intro into the products. And so I thought that possibly there are going to be some people perhaps on this call who may have been at that particular presentation. And I thought I would just sort of do a bit of a recap on that, so that in fact we could actually work on from that point. So I've said nutrition is our weapon of choice. You can see we've got a whole lot of products, and it's obviously very challenging to know where to start. So I'm going to just go back to the basics. So for those of you who've heard it all before, you know there's always something new to learn. All of us learn something new, or the penny drops in a different way. So I'm just going to go to share now, and hopefully my screen comes up. Okay, so I'm just trying to share my screen with you, right? So this, I think, is what Brandon started out with, and we all talk about this in the fact that we are looking at our level of energy, our level of tiredness, and eventually how some diseases actually influence our lives. And yeah, I think it's fair to say that as we start out in our lives, obviously as kids, we're very energetic, and we always talk about going from various phases, almost without realizing it. We all tend to slip into these different zones, lose our level of energy as we become adults and have to worry about energetic children. And sometimes we slip into a sort of tire zone that becomes our norm, and we sometimes ignore some of the little signs that we get, or perhaps the doctor even might say, what's your blood pressure, or what's your cholesterol or your sugar. And we tend, you know, to say, okay, I'll do it tomorrow type of thing. Before we know it, those particular conditions start getting given names. And these things sort of start to happen to us, you know, relatively young, as you can see. Diseases of lifestyle are not really exclusive just to the fact that we're living longer. Certainly it's attributable to that, but some of these things are starting to hit us much earlier and being given names, you know, as I say, like blood pressure becomes an issue and cholesterol becomes an issue, sometimes in quite young people. They've even seen it in young children, in fact. So it's very worrying, but this is a tendency that's happening in our lives today. And this is what we want to say as nutrition is our weapon. We're going to show you, in fact, how we can influence our well-being. And it seems like we all want to live longer. And I mean, we've put 100 years there. And you know, the more I think about it, I'd rather live healthier. And if I don't make 100 years, well, that's good. But I'd rather not be wobbling along as that line starts to do, you know, sort of from midlife onwards, if some of these lifestyle diseases, due to our lifestyle choices, start to take over. And so if you start to see, in fact, we spend, you know, far too much time actually in the sort of sick zone, when in fact we should be in the energetic zone much more. So we're wanting to help people to actually achieve that. So that's really what this little graph is. A very simple little graph, but can actually tell a whole lot of stories. So we're talking about conditions of lifestyle, things that our choices, our food choices, our lifestyle choices, and how that influences our health and how we can do something about it, using nutrition as our weapon. I know you made reference to the enemies that we have, which are natural processes in our body. Oxidation and inflammation is terminology that our body understands. It's just the fact of how we manage it, how we cope with it, how we neutralize it and resolve it. So we need antioxidants. That's where the word oxidation comes from, and why we use antioxidants. These are processes that happen in our bodies normally, but it's just the fact that we have to have neutralizing agents, or we have to have the counter to oxidation and inflammation, so that our bodies work the way they should, but also behave in a healthy way. And so providing solutions to these global trends, because these diseases of lifestyle are really uppermost in the statistics, and they're happening all around the world, and very much related to our Western lifestyle. And I've got the intersecting circle simply because they all influence one another. And that's very important to realize. And I think as we go through this evening, we'll realize it even more. And I even be amazed at how everything interrelates. So we can't just say, you know, I've got a little bit of blood pressure, or my sugar's a little bit up. It actually starts to influence your heart. If you're overweight, it starts to influence your sugar levels. And that's literally how the cycle goes. So it's important for us to see this interaction and intersection and how they influence one another. So as I say, we're going to use food as our weapon. And you can see we need to have a colorful plate of food, and I'll refer to it literally as our plate of food. That's what we're looking at. That's what we're doing with nutrition. You know, where does the food go? It's made up of nutrition. It goes into our cells. And so we need a whole variety of different nutrients to enable our bodies to work well. So this is what Brandon made reference to at the cellular level. And this picture is very, very familiar to all our distributors. But, you know, the more I see it, and as simple as it is, wow, it's almost like an embroidery. You can actually keep on adding topics and information to this little basic picture, which is what we're going to do tonight. So you look at that circle there, the one that looks healthy, the one that's nice and round, and look at green arrows that are going in and out. And we're going to talk about those particular things in a different way this evening. And if our cells are not working well, they start to look like the one on the left. And if enough of them look like that, well, that's exactly how we will look and feel, because we are made up of trillions of cells. So in order to make that plate of ours colorful and to work for us, we know that there are dietary gaps. I think all of us have to admit that we don't always achieve all the recommendations that are made around the world that we've all heard of before, but we don't achieve it. So NeoLife have stepped right in there and said, okay, we're going to help you achieve it. And we're simply going to deliver some of those nutrients in a different delivery form, whether it be in a powder or a capsule. So you can see that little box there of Pro-Vitality, pretty colorful itself. So that helps the color and the quality of our plate of food. Very briefly, just to remind you all, this is what's in the Pro-Vitality. So we're not talking about our plate being full of a lot of starch when people think of grains. We're actually talking about the oils in those grains that are processed out of our foods. We're talking about the oils out of that fish. We're talking about the colors in the fruit and vegetables. And then we're talking about variety with vitamins and minerals. So I've added a little bit of busyness to the slide just to sort of remind you of what those things actually do. Think about those intersecting circles that you saw. The oils are necessary so that all those cell membranes work well, so that those green arrows you saw could actually enter the cell and the waste could get out. That our fish that we are eating, yes, it gives us quality protein, but it also gives us oils. Those oils also go to the cell membrane and help it to work properly so that nutrients can be absorbed and waste can be eliminated. The fruit and vegetables, they give us all sorts of vitamins and fiber, but the very important thing that they give us is the color. And that's why I talk about a colorful plate. And you'll see there that they do all sorts of amazing things, infect our immunity, our eyes, our skin, our heart. And we talked about heart as one of those circles that you saw. So it's been proven, this product, to actually prevent our cholesterol from oxidizing. When I look at the fish, the omega-3, for example, and I've put under heart triglycerides, the product has been tested, and all these products are tested on humans. And we found that, in fact, it reduces some of the fats in the blood, which in fact contribute to heart disease. They reduce these triglycerides, which is what you have checked when you have your cholesterol tested. It went down 17% in just 8 weeks. So if you keep eating adequate amounts of fish, you're going to keep heart disease at bay. And then, of course, variety of vitamins and minerals will influence all systems of the body. So just to look at you, give you some absolute pointers as to why NeoLife is so really good at this type of thing and why we take it very seriously. We test the products, as I pointed out. And in fact, these TNN grain concentrates, the oils out of the grains that are staples around the world, but in fact, the oil has been removed. When it is introduced back into the diet, it actually improves the utilization of all other nutrients that we eat. In other words, things can get in the cell and increase that capacity by 50%. So just by having the right oils on your cell membranes and in your diet, you're going to improve everything else that you eat, including the vitamin and mineral supplement that you take, by 50%. I said we'd researched the omega-3 salmon oil plus, and I talked about the triglycerides, but in actual fact, inflammation, and you saw that as one of the enemies if it's not managed. This product, in just 8 weeks, can actually manage that inflammatory response and improve it by 68%, in other words, reduce it. So we already, just by putting in the right foods on that plate of ours and tweaking it just a little every day, we can actually make a huge impact on what's happening in our body and keeping these diseases of lifestyle under control. The fruit and vegetable extracts, this product carotenoid complex, again, tested on humans, shown to improve our immune system by 37% in just 20 days. It's mind-boggling. I'm sure we've all heard this all before, but actually when you sometimes just think about it again, it's amazing what the food does, the food on our plate is doing for our bodies. And when it's not there, It also gives you something to think about. And of course, the other part of the core products that you saw the Pro-Vitality and you saw the NeoLife shake. We've just simply delivered some really good nutrition, but in a powder form that can be mixed up literally within seconds. Good quality protein, lean, because much of the protein, we're eating a lot of protein, but we're eating a lot of proteins that are high in saturated fats, which do have a negative effect on our heart health. So this is lean protein and very high quality. In other words, every component of protein that the body needs from a nutritional point of view is present in this product. You saw on that, that of course influences our heart disease. And I'm always taking you back to those little circles of the intersecting ones, heart health. You saw diabetes there. Well, we've got a product that we have here, which in actual fact is what we call glycemically controlled. In other words, we're regulating the sugars, because that is what spikes into the blood, causes our body to be stressed because it's constantly trying to balance our sugar levels if we're eating without thinking or not knowing. So this product is kind of taking care of all those things. We're looking at heart health. We're looking at regulating blood sugar levels so we don't tire out our body, don't tire out our pancreas, which sets us up for diabetes. So it's not the fact that it's a sugar, it's the fact of how our body behaves and how the sugar behaves in our body. And remember, carbohydrates, sugars are carbohydrates, and carbohydrates are not bad things. They simply have to be selected properly, and we need to eat the appropriate amount of them. Fiber in this product makes a huge impact on our sugar levels. Why? Because it controls the way the sugars actually are absorbed, how quickly they're absorbed. It helps to regulate our appetite and therefore our weight. So I think you can start to see, if you just picture back to those little intersecting circles, we're talking about heart health here, we're talking about diabetes, we're talking about being overweight. Fiber will also help to mop up some of the cholesterol and even move it out of the body. So look how powerful just some of the nutrients are. And because they are lacking in our diets, there's always going to be a day where we don't get all the nutrients we recommended. So this is where NeoLife wants to come in and say, let's help you fill a gap. We're not taking the place of the food, and we're not taking away the responsibility of the individual. We're simply saying, these disease patterns are getting out of control. Let us help you fill those gaps. Let us control that cycle that you could see. Yeah, I mean, the shake should make you feel good. I mean, it's all these things it doesn't have in it, which is quite unusual in our modern day dietary foods that are available to us. Sometimes we don't even realize some of the things we're eating have undesirable substances. And of course, we're not contributing to the problem by trying to make the thing taste nice, putting all sorts of artificial things in there. So, this is really basic food delivered in a very tasty way with a whole lot of benefits, nothing artificial in anything. So just to show you that core products that we made reference to and always do as our starting point really have an impact on our diet. So if I just go back and put them into some sort of context there, I've just abbreviated the treanin and the omega-3, the names of the products, so it's just easier to read. And you start to see that, in different proportions and concentrations, some of the products influence sugar more than perhaps heart and vice versa. So you'll see though that just those two sets of products that are our core products already influence those intersecting circles. Right, so now what I actually want to do this evening is to say, okay, we all know about the core products, and when you looked at that initial picture that I had on the screen, there are a lot of products, and where do you start? So that's where you start. But tonight I want to challenge you to add some other absolute essentials to that core offering. Yes, obviously, if someone has sore joints or an issue with their eyes, there are products that are specific to that. But for your everyday, tweaking that plate of food and influencing those intersecting circles, there are products that I really believe should be added on for everybody to benefit from. And certainly Botanical Balance is one of those. I think you've all been exposed to them. I think you've certainly seen some of the fantastic feedback we've had. And what is it? It's basic food again: cinnamon, curcumin, turmeric, spices and seasonings. What I want you just to be aware of is that word at the bottom there, called polyphenols or polyphenols. Now, this is probably to some people a new word, even to some of our distributors. But in fact, I'm going to show you that it's a collective term for some of the nutrients we already have and how they're actually influencing our health. So Botanical Balance, based on those circles that you saw that were intersecting, diabetes, in other words, glucose imbalance, a lack of control of our sugar, which is, or blood sugar, which is called blood glucose, is causing a huge concern around the world. In fact, it's on a vertical path. The International Diabetic Federation is in Africa. The African region is doing the worst. And over the next 25 years, their projection is that the incidence of diabetes is going to increase by 143%, which is kind of unbelievable to even think about. So we have to really concern ourselves with our blood glucose control. Otherwise, and that's based on, you saw that already in your basic products, NeoLife Shake. We're already doing that and have been doing that for 20 years. So we are concerned about it, but we are saying there's new science, putting these foods together, making sure that they're on your plate of food. So polyphenols are doing this, but let's talk a little bit about this. I think all of us can relate to the fact that if we are, let's say we're hungry or we're tired, we lose focus, we're irritable, and we want to fall asleep. As soon as we have something to eat, we feel a lot better, because that's what has happened is that our blood glucose has increased. And in fact, the first place that we'll go to will be prioritized is to the brain. So our blood glucose levels actually influence our cognitive skills as well. And so I want to add to this cycle here. We know about diabetes. We know that the botanical balance is going to influence that. Type 1 or type 2 diabetes, as we've talked about, in people who are borderline. But I want to start including cognitive health into this intersecting circle. Because in fact, this is a concerning area, because this is really where dementia comes in. Dementia is not a single condition, it's a group of related conditions, of which one we're starting to hear a lot about is Alzheimer's, and it's certainly becoming a huge concern. And so again, here's some intersecting circles that you'll start to see they influence one another. So when I talked about glucose levels, and I talked about botanical balance, the interesting thing is, as I say, it affects our mood, it affects how alert we are. So when we're tired and hungry, we're not as alert, we can't remember, we can't focus. So the levels of our blood sugar is extremely important. And clearly by the incidence of diabetes that's coming our way, we aren't in control of that at all. And so if one has some sort of already underlying glucose imbalance, it's going to start affecting our cognitive health and possibly further down the road. Now, the interesting thing, in fact, so much so is the link. The term that's being thrown around, it's not an official term yet, but it's certainly in the literature, and our scientists are even making mention of it, is, we have a type 1 diabetes and we have a type 2 diabetes. You've probably heard of that. There's now the one that they think relates to the brain and is affecting the brain. They're even calling it type 3 diabetes. This is how influential negatively that the blood sugar levels are for our cognitive health. And so it's very important that we keep our blood glucose levels controlled. And so we need to look at those core products, and we definitely need to start looking at botanical balance for our cognitive health, not just for our blood sugar test and we say, oh, type 1 or type 2 diabetes. There's a whole component out there that's affecting our cognitive skills. Now, the interesting thing also is that in research, as I said, type 1, type 2, we always thought that only the muscle cells, the liver cells, the fat cells were actually sensitive to blood glucose levels. I think I've actually got a slide here where I've actually shown that we can actually, the way the cell membrane is important, and the where the body recognizes glucose and the insulin, and they have to talk to each other and work properly. And we always thought, as I say, that it was only the muscle or the liver or the fat cells that were relating to the insulin. And we always thought, because the brain is so dependent on glucose, that the glucose would get to the brain through the blood and it would automatically be transported into the right cells. But that actually isn't the case. There are cells in our brain that actually depend on insulin to be present and to be working properly, so that the cells in the brain can actually absorb that glucose. So it's not just a given that because glucose is in the bloodstream, the brain will automatically receive it. And the interesting thing is that the cells that actually are dependent on insulin in the brain are the cells that are related to memory, learning, which are the areas that actually affect us when we have some sort of cognitive decline. People forget how to do things. People haven't got memory. And so those cells in the brain are dependent on the way our insulin and our sugar works together. And we always thought it was not related to the brain. We always thought the brain simply got the glucose because it needed it. And now we realize that in fact, it doesn't automatically get it. The balance of insulin and glucose has to be balanced. So that's quite an interesting thing and something that is very new. Also in terms of our cognitive health as well, what's good for our brain or good for our heart is good for our brain and vice versa. Now, the common things that we know with heart health, and very common in that little graph that I showed you right in the beginning, blood pressure, cholesterol problems, is part of what we call a metabolic syndrome. It's so common that people have blood pressure, they're on blood pressure medication, they're on cholesterol medication, and on sugar medication, that it's actually got a name. It's called a metabolic syndrome. But these three conditions pretty much go together. So that's why those circles are intersecting. And generally the common denominator generally is that we have, we're carrying a bit too much weight. So that's why they intersect. But in fact, they found that people, particularly in sort of our middle years, let's say midlife 50 years and onwards, if we have those factors, if we have blood pressure issues, cholesterol issues, we're part of that metabolic syndrome, the possibility of our cognitive health being affected is much, much higher. So I don't want to sound like it's all negative, but the point is I want you to start to see it, how all this is so interrelated that we can't just turn around and say, oh, I've got a little bit of sugar, or I've got a little bit of blood pressure. We have to start taking note of the fact that, let's look after ourselves. Let's respect our bodies and what we eat. And if we can't always have a perfect plate of food, let's make sure that we fill those dietary gaps. So remember, what's good for the heart is also good for the brain. Okay, so it seems like we can't always, in fact, we can never really separate our gut and our gut health from our general well-being. And here I want to introduce flavonoids. Now, in fact, we've had flavonoids, when did we bring them out? About nearly 30 years ago, actually. And probably still today, many people have never heard of flavonoids. And remember, for those of you who were around that long ago, we basically pioneered these kind of terminology. And flavonoids, we didn't invent fruit and vegetables, we didn't invent flavonoids. Flavonoids is the name of a collective term for the pigments. And you'll see there in the picture, I tried to show you the berries and the bright blues and purples and rich greens in some cases, and some of the citrus fruits. The colors in those are actually called flavonoids. That's what gives them their color. And typically, when we introduced it, at that time, now this is, we're talking 30 years ago, well ahead of its time, we, of course, as always, put the whole family, and that's why we call it a complex. You can see lots of different foods, and those different foods that are in the product are representative of different members of the flavonoid family. And there are many, many different nutrients in this group, but these are representative of it. And at the time, it was considered, we were actually bringing it out as an antioxidant. Now, you saw the word oxidation earlier in the presentation. And now, and at the time, 30 years ago, the talk about oxidation, free radicals, and all that sort of damage and the inflammation that was caused by it was a very hot topic. And so we looked at these products and these ingredients, flavonoids, for their antioxidant benefits. And that, of course, as I say, was very, very new science. And we were right there on the button 30 years ago, nearly, bringing it out. But in fact, a whole lot of new understanding has come out about flavonoids, because flavonoids also fall under that family. Remember I mentioned polyphenols when you saw the botanical balance, the spices and the seasonings. This is the name of the big group of family called polyphenols, and flavonoids are a member of that family, but they're the largest member of that family. So we brought it out as an antioxidant, and most of you recognize it as a water-soluble antioxidant. And I want to just mention a story actually that just kind of highlights that based in nature, backed by science concept that we talk about. And it's not just something that comes off our tongue because it sounds good. I want to actually just show you this in action. I was listening to a talk just the other day between some of the members of our scientific advisory board, and they were reminiscing and talking about different nutrients and all the different cycles of disease and new things that are coming on the spectrum. But they made reference to our flavonoid complex those days, 25, 30 years ago. And we always test our products, and we test them to make sure that they are absorbed and that the body recognizes them. And then, of course, usually we test them on humans after they've been developed to understand the way they have benefited them. But what they actually admitted at the time, these two scientists who were talking, they were saying, 30 years ago, we were checking out all these different flavonoids in our product. And there was one particular group of flavonoids that weren't as well absorbed in the body and into the bloodstream as we would have anticipated. And we didn't seem to understand why. Now, the interesting thing is we didn't remove them from the product simply because we couldn't find them in the bloodstream. We appreciated and respected nature's blueprint because they're in nature and because they're in the foods that we eat and they're part of the human food chain. They clearly have a part to play. We may not understand at this time, but we're going to leave them in the combination. And those were they were called anthocyanins, one of the family of flavonoids. And the reason why I tell you this is because today, now that there's so much more research and research capability and technology and techniques and starting to tease away, bits and pieces in the foods to understand how they work, what we've realized now is that particular group that didn't actually get absorbed into the bloodstream wasn't meant to get absorbed into the bloodstream. It was actually meant to go further down the gut, right into the intestine, and actually to influence the concentration of some of the bacteria in our gut, to inhibit the bad bacteria and to ensure that there was a better population of beneficial bacteria. Now that gut health, we're talking about it big time today, in terms of, recent studies. And yet 30 years ago, here was an ingredient that actually we didn't understand at the time, but we left it in the product because nature is the driver. Science is purely the investigator. And we didn't make an arrogant decision, as science tends to do, and say, well, we don't understand that, we're not going to put it in. We left it in because it's part of nature's blueprint. We've discovered now that it goes right down into the gut, influences the gut bacteria. And you know what happens then? Those bacteria actually work on that particular flavonoid and they convert it into other substances. And you know what happens to those substances? They get to the brain. They cross what we call the blood-brain barrier, which is meaning that the brain is protected. Everything doesn't automatically, because it's in the blood, end up in the brain. There's a barrier, and only certain things are allowed to cross that barrier. And this particular member of the flavonoid family is invited, if you like, across the barrier. And it has very, very positive effects on our brain cells and the nerve cells. It increases the blood flow in the brain. It lowers inflammation. Remember, that's one of our enemies if we don't get a handle on it. And so it started explaining the benefits from a cognitive point of view. So all those intersecting circles are all influencing one another. But I thought that was quite a fascinating thing. It also highlights our scientific understanding and our commitment. As I say, we didn't, as scientists suggest, well, we'll leave it out because we don't understand it. If nature had it as a blueprint, we're going to put it in there. And yes, we've discovered 25, 30 years later that actually it has value, not just as an antioxidant, because as an antioxidant it reduces oxidation and inflammation, but it's influencing our brain. So Acidophilus Plus is also going to influence our brain because it's going to influence the gut. And so the products that I'm talking about here, we've added to our core products, we've added Botanical Balance. It should be hooked on to everybody's intake if they're really serious about making sure their plate of food is what it should be. Flavonoids, which are the fruit and vegetable family, we've talked about that, and now we know it's far more than an antioxidant. It's got benefits to a growing concern in terms of disease patterns in our modern world, and that's cognitive health. And of course, the gut has a big part to play in that. And so we have to make sure that the gut, it's very much, as I say, a topical issue, very high on the agenda in terms of making sure that our health, that our gut is strong so that our health is strong. And so we've had Acidophilus Plus. Now again, interestingly, we didn't have it in South Africa until relatively recently, but we introduced this product about 25 years ago. Again, well ahead of its time, because we're actually interested in not just what is a fact, we're interested in scientific thinking, what is coming down the road. And so we're always thinking ahead. So this product, we have tweaked it and we have improved it, and just recently we've even enhanced some of the features of it. But this product has been around because we recognized the relationship of all the different organs, one with the other. And so each capsule of Acidophilus plus Acidophilus is a probiotic. It brings those friendly bacteria, the ones that I talked about that flavonoid was influencing. We have in fact, a huge population of bacteria that live in our gut. And we live happily together provided the balance is right. And so if the balance is out, and it happens very easily, we must make sure that we achieve balance by introducing something like a probiotic. And so Acidophilus Plus has 5 billion of these live microorganisms per capsule. Now it's all very well, and you can see from the little graphic there on the slide, it's all fine to swallow it. But before it gets, the first reservoir that it reaches is the stomach. Highly acidic, and it's meant to be because actually the stomach protects us. That acid that's in the stomach is intended to kill undesirable substances that we've eaten, bacteria for that matter. And so sometimes things don't actually survive beyond the stomach. So that's a huge challenge because we wanted to go further down the piping, as you can see, and be deposited further down because that's actually where it's going to influence our health the most. So we have a very, very exclusive actually system called Gel Guard. So we coat the product so that we can actually keep all the bacteria in, but right underneath the outer coating is this Gel Guard process, which is actually food-based. And if that coating, the outer coating of the capsule, is dissolved in the stomach, this food stuff will actually become sort of solidifies. It actually becomes a matrix, and it actually holds all the bacteria, the inside of the container. In other words, all those bacteria, it helps them together, it holds them, and it survives the acid in the stomach and actually moves along with any other food and the normal activities. There's muscular activity that moves food along down our piping, as it were. And in a more desirable environment, it actually lets go and releases these bacteria. So that's hugely important. If we want to make a difference to our plate of food, if you like, and how it influences, our diet influences our health, we've got to make sure that the foods get where they're supposed to go. And the nutrients that we package in simply different delivery forms get where they should be going. And so this is a very, very advanced product. And we were doing this 20 years ago, 25 years ago. And just recently, we have actually enhanced this Gel Guard activity and capability because things change and technology changes, as I pointed out to you. We found that out with flavonoids. And so we can enhance it and make sure it's even more effective. So what we're doing here is we're actually putting all these things together. And actually, I just want to talk about these intersecting circles. So don't forget that they all influence one another. Our cognitive health, our heart health, levels of sugar level control, certainly our weight, and our gut, almost, if you like, a circle should really go right around all of them. And so I hope today I've just showed you that, in fact, there's some very basic products, Acidophilus Plus, flavonoid complex, which to some extent has been relegated simply as an antioxidant. It's a very powerful one, but it has many, many other benefits now to the very, very topical issues of our gut and our cognitive health. So let's bring that back and attach it to our core offering. And of course, Botanical Balance directly influences our blood sugar levels and will influence our cognitive health. So these 3 products that I've just chatted about this evening, I want you to think about them and introduce them to the people who perhaps are, not necessarily taking other products, they're simply taking core products. We need to make sure that every facet of their health is in good condition. Now, a lot of this information, actually, you may not be aware of it, is actually in your lifestyle magazines. So your one, the 3rd quarter last year and the 4th quarter, there's one on brain health, there's one on probiotics. Yes, some of it seems a bit technical, but go through that and just have a look at it, pick up the pertinent points. And in fact, even if you're not interested in reading all those things, it gives you such a lot of credibility. You can give it to people so that they can research it. And they can even go further and research the references that we've put to the articles. So that's the sort of support that we've got at NeoLife. These are what our scientists put out for us. Flip through the magazine. It's a fantastic magazine. Look for your picture and your friend's picture or somebody in your team. But also the news you can use is something there to give you knowledge, to give you credibility, and for you to share good information. So you'll find out information about the brain health that I was talking about and the probiotics. And so I really think that we are providing solutions to global trends. That's what we started with. Remember, all of these are interlinked. I think I've pointed that out. And I think we all know enough about these things to realize that our weight influences our heart, our glucose levels influences our heart health, and our weight certainly influences our glucose levels. Now we've learned that in fact they all influence one another and are affecting our health in terms of our brain. And this is an area that is quite an enigma. It's puzzling that we've such a big spike in dementias, Alzheimer's in particular. And can you see that in fact we need to look after our health from every facet? And of course, gut health directly, you almost can't separate any of these conditions from the quality of the health of our gut. And so I hope that I've convinced you to realize that we have our core products, they influence certainly everything that is on the screen, but there are other things we've introduced that sometimes we don't realize are so supportive of the conditions that many of us are facing. And even though we're living longer, which is an interesting thing, I think that quality of the length of our life is not always that good. So we're sort of hobbling along. Medications are propping people up. People are often not learning anything about how their bodies work or why things are happening because, well, we'll get a medication. And that is definitely the sort of approach that we don't take. Yes, we'll use nutrition as our weapon, and we'll put whole families of nutrients together, not just concentrated amounts of one ingredient or one medication, which just does the job and actually teaches nothing about how you should look after the body. And still, even though you might be, let's say, controlling your cholesterol, for example, there's still inflammation, there's still oxidation. All these other factors are still playing a part in all those other circles. So a good thing to think about is using nutrition as your weapon. It's certainly one that we believe in, certainly one that I think we've proved beyond doubt because we test these products on humans and we've seen the benefits. And many of you have given us feedback to the amazing benefits that you've had. So I think that, that's what I've just wanted to share with you today, adding on to your core products, and that nutrition is definitely a weapon that is worthwhile using, tweaking that plate of food, and we're going to help you do it so that it's colorful, full of fiber, good of nutrients, and that you can live a long life that is healthy, a good length, in other words, a good quantity of life and a good quality of life. So thank you very much. That's me done. Thank you, Brandon.
Wow, thank you very much.